Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Lazzouni. We are ready for you to start whenever you're ready.
عليكم السلام. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونتوب إليه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أما بعد. Inshallah ta'ala, today what we want to reflect on together is the idea of the gift of time as this precious commodity gets gifted to individuals, communities, and nations alike. And people scoop from it and put at their disposal and this gift to work as they see fit when they decide on their own priorities for their own life. Individuals do it, communities do it, and certainly entire nations and civilizations do it. I like very much the mental model of one of the best teachers of all time, a North African scholar and really a luminary by the name of Malik bin Nabi, who once said that this gift of opportunity of time is like a river that flows. And by the way, the analogy is not accidental. While in the tribulations that in the world of science we have to suffer through and contend with to try to define really what the nature of time is, the religious communities in the sacred language have a rather simple but very powerful understanding of what time is. It is something that flows, and when it goes, it does not come back. I think its simplicity is as powerful as it is disarming in many ways, because it's anchored into the reality of the spiritual, if you wish, dimension in which we live, which is not necessarily captured by the material world that we live into. And so to go back to his point, he says that when this river of opportunity and time flows, people take from it as much as they are predisposed to do so. There are those that scoop from it large amounts, which they put to good use. And there are those that perhaps will waste that opportunity and not make enough of it. So the calendars at the end of every year, when they change from one digit to the other and increment by one, going from 2021 to 2022, in some instances, it's really a non-event. And in some other instances, it is perhaps a time to pause, perhaps reflect, take stock of what has passed, what's likely to come, and use that moment as a moment of introspection and retrospection. I like very much the idea of a recent article in the New York Times where the author titled the piece a food audit. I thought that was an intriguing proposition. Perhaps an analogy to this would be to perform the equivalent of a spiritual audit, where one would take stock of one's spiritual state and would perhaps benchmark it to some reality and then see to it to do some sort of analysis on its gap, areas of improvement, and make maybe those areas of improvement a priority to put behind them the resources, including the gift of time, to advance one's spiritual state in a healthier and more conducive way, aligned with our humanity, with our ambitions, and our desire to grow and evolve towards our ideal self. This used to be, in fact, a blueprint of our beloved Prophet ﷺ. One of the things that he used to do to his companions when he would encounter them into the streets or the markets he would ask them of their state and condition of their faith and their spirituality. So he would say, so how are you today? That was not simply inclusive of the health and the well-being, it was also inclusive of one's spiritual state. Do I feel whole in terms of who I am and what I am here to do in this life, and how well I am preparing for the life to come? And while there are certainly many avenues that one can pursue towards the improvement endeavor that we would engage with, I am going to focus, inshallah, in today's Khatira on one prescription only. My hope is by putting the entire focus on one, I will give it the time it deserves to cover it appropriately. B, in the hope that it would transfer to all of us to perhaps peer through the veil of the things that usually distract us from grabbing on to one idea and staying with it. And 3, perhaps achieve the longevity of it. So when we grab onto it, it can stay with us for a while until we do it justice in practice, not so much so in learning, but also in practice. And what is that idea? So before I disclose exactly what the prescription is, I'm going to take a very short detour to go back to the seerah, the history of the life of our beloved Prophet ﷺ, and to use him as the protagonist of that story to get us to what is the advice that we can learn from him by virtue of the fact that he is our teacher, obviously, first and foremost, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Most biographers and scholars of the life of the Prophet ﷺ say that the 2 most demanding periods of his life are the following ones, and that's accepted by general consensus. Obviously, one can add others or perhaps find substitutes for these 2, but these 2 seem to have commanded within the community of scholars a position where the consensus is reasonable on the 2 of them. Clearly, one of them has been labeled even by its naming convention of its rubric to give the hint and make it self-evident as to why this was a challenging and difficult trial of the Prophet ﷺ. And that was the year that preceded his migration from Mecca to Medina. In that particular year, dubbed by Muslim historians as Am al-Huzn, the year of sadness, you could immediately grasp from the naming and the title what it could have contained or what it culminated into to deserve such a difficult name. And it was the year in which the Prophet ﷺ, for all intents purposes, one can describe perhaps that way, came to the realization that his mission in Mecca has arrived to a failure, having spent significant amount of time trying to bring the message of Islam to the Meccans. He has been met by nothing but spite, disdain, opposition, a very, very small rate of conversion to his cause, and accompanied with the rather poor performance on his mission, he was also met by extraordinary tragedies at his personal level, in his family life, by the loss of his beloved wife, in his support structure, by the loss of his grandfathers and others who were around him, being cut off from his tribe, having those who followed him tortured, abused, and put to death, and many, many other things have come together to really make that year very difficult. And so that is somewhat self-evident to understand why this was elevated to being a testing period in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The other one, who perhaps doesn't receive as much coverage as it wants, which is going to be the theme that will take us to today's point and advice and lesson that we will take from it, took place very early on in his life at the age of 40, when he had just received the gift of revelation. He used to go in isolation to seek some solace in solitude in order to be a seeker for the higher spirit without being distracted with the values that were around him and the things that were running counter to the current of a genuine spiritual seeker who was trying to commune with the larger realities and the forces that were genuine and authentic, that were really at work behind this universe. And in this cave, in this isolated cave on the hill of a little mount called Ghar Hira, he used to go and try to find some peace, tranquility, and silence to meditate and reflect on these big ideas. And on one of these occasions, as the story is very well known to all Muslims, he receives an experience like none other in comparison to the ones that he has received before, which then was dubbed as the turning point of his life in disclosing to him that he was chosen to be a prophet and messenger, and the delivery of that message and that turning point came by way of the archangel Jibril alayhi salam, and that was the turning point of the Prophet's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he was elevated from being an ordinary human being to the status of being a prophet and messenger. So that's a traumatic event in of itself, but one can see on how, while the trauma of dealing with the unknown was there, the elation, the excitement, the opportunity to discover the sense of this world beyond the physical, that has this whole metaphysical experience, called being a prophet. In other words, someone that's gifted to receive the gift of divine direction and command, was rather unique and very special. So that gift was so special to him that it did something to him like what each and every one of us, perhaps in today's world, to use a rather cheap analogy or argument, is to win the lottery. You get to something that is life-changing, life-altering in terms of the size, the impact, and what it does. And then it comes all crashing down. For 40 days and 40 nights after the experience of the revelation, he got cut off from it. As one can only imagine what would that do, I like always to give the analogy of something that is very simple and very mundane, that is life-altering in the relationship of human beings. Suppose as a man, perhaps in my youth, I am in public transportation going from a point A to a point B, and I see the face of a woman that would be angelic, and I see in her my soulmate and my future, my love, the person I would want to share my life with, or the rest of my life with. And I don't know her, and she doesn't know me, and we have this accidental encounter into a bus. I don't talk to her, and then she gets off the bus, and I continue on my journey, and that just gets severed. It'll be devastating to come to the realization that here is the gift that was given to you to find the love of your life, to be united with the one that would make you whole. And out of a sudden, that opportunity goes and you can no longer grab onto it, and you would no longer know what to do your life after it, because it gets displaced to a point that now you are in pieces and you no longer know how to put the pieces together. And then you would grab onto anything, imagination, outlandish thoughts, what would seem to be irrational behavior, perhaps get on the bus every day and go through the same route in the hope that the hand of providence would make her cross your path again. So you would pounce on that opportunity and go talk to her, or you do things of that nature. And pretty much in some sense, this happened to the Prophet ﷺ. He questioned his experience. Did I really receive revelation? He no longer knew what to do with himself. It's like something happened to him where he could no longer go back to where he used to be. He could no longer move forward because the same force that changed him had to come back to move him forward. And he got stuck in this twilight between two worlds, a world that he knew well that he could no longer go back to, a world that he was destined to go for, but he neither have the key nor the map to go there. And that's the most debilitating of positions to be into and spaces to exist in. Add to that, suppose that in the case of this analogy of the hardship, add to that there will be those who would capitalize on this hardship to in fact make you feel worse about your experience. Instead of alleviating your hardship and your suffering, they would make you feel worse. So what the people of Mecca used to do in those 40 days, when they realized that he was cut off from revelation, they used to come and taunt him and abuse him by saying in the Arabic language, وَدَّعَ رَبُّ مُحَمَّدٍ مُحَمَّدًا وَقَالَهَا. The God of Muhammad that he claimed has given him a revelation has abandoned him and detests him. So they used to come and rub this in his face day in and day out, while the Prophet ﷺ was anxiously awaiting for relief. So this is like when someone is already in hardship, in a position of trauma, in a position of loss, but instead of finding support, you find people who are ready there to drown you further into the misery and to the suffering in which you are. And the Prophet ﷺ had in fact to endure this. And now you can see why the biographers and the historians of Islam call this episode as difficult on the life of the Prophet ﷺ as the one that was at the end of his tenure in Mecca before he traveled to Medina. And on the 40th day, Jibril alayhi salam appears again and comes to the Prophet ﷺ and recites for him the following verses, which were like the equivalent of spiritual nurturing and nectar to the taste, the ears, the emotions, and the spirit of the Prophet ﷺ. Is like when you are thirsty, but instead of quenching your thirst with just mere water, you quench your thirst with the nectar of the most desirable and the most amazing fruit you could possibly have access to. That's how the relief came to the Prophet ﷺ in terms of the sweet words that he hears from Jibril alayhi salam when he starts to recite the following beautiful verses. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. By the dawn and by the night that has eclipsed and gone away. مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Your God and your Lord did not abandon you and did not detest you. Note that the use of the words, the form of the grammar, and how it was put in a form that was negated against the exact same wording that the pagans of Quraysh have been used is not accidental. It's a rebuttal, a word for word disclosure that reuses their words, but reuses them to make the Prophet ﷺ whole again, instead of making him feel that he was abandoned. So instead of an insult, now it becomes a compliment and a commitment and a covenant that comes back to him from his creator. Ma wadda'aka rabbuka. They used to tell him, Rabbu Muhammadin, the Lord of Muhammad, has abandoned Muhammad. The Prophet ﷺ hears from Jibreel that your Lord has not abandoned you. وَمَا قَلَى. They used to tell him, and he detests you. And the angel replied, and he does not, making them liars, fabricating a reality that is not what it purports to be. And then he tells him, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. He tells him that our game, what we are in this for, it's not about the 40 days. It's not about the first encounter that you have had, nor is it about this relief that's being given to you right now. It is about the journey, a journey that has two legs into it, this life and the one to come. And the glad tidings that I am giving to you, the one to come is much better than all this. In other words, know, O Prophet of Allah, and know, O Muhammad, that this relief that you are being given now is not a pill, the effect of which will subside after 4 hours or after 6 hours, and you have to take it again. If you take on this thing, this gift of revelation, the good that will come from it is for now and for the hereafter. And hence the Prophet ﷺ is made whole again. And that's really the theme of this Khatira. The theme of the Khatira here, which we can take from the learning of the Prophet ﷺ, is the comparison between the two conditions: a life that is cut off from revelation, and a life in which revelation is the centerpiece of existence. Looking at it through the lens of the experience of the Prophet ﷺ, a life that is not centered around revelation is synonymous with loss, anxiety, absence of purpose, emptiness, emotional abuse, doesn't have any meaning, and shattered and broken without no way to put it back together. And in fact, any attempt to put it back together would not be authentic or genuine. It'll be a mere stopgap that will fall apart again and will go nowhere, because at the level of substance, it's not being addressed at the root cause. A life that we try to repair without revelation as being its centerpiece, it's like constantly dealing with symptoms without ever getting the root cause that solves well and heals for good. Contrast this with the life that came after the verse that was revealed. First, let us reflect on how Allah introduces the solution of a life centered around revelation. Think about the choice of words that He has chosen to announce to the Prophet ﷺ that the page has been turned and he's coming to a new age. How did he announce this to him? By the dawn. There was darkness before. And we have just lifted the veil of darkness, and now light permeates everything. Light is this extraordinary experience that brings existence into reality. It's like you turn the lights on in a dark room, or like the morning dawn breaks, and out of a sudden the forms that adorn the landscape start to reveal themselves one by one. When the light is dim, all you see are just the forms. When the light gets brighter, you start seeing the colors. When it gets even brighter, you start seeing the texture, the nuances. All of this starts to get revealed. So Jibril comes to him and says, now that you are going to be reconnected with the revelation, the starting point of the entire experience is the lifting of the veil of darkness, and dawn has arrived. So that's the first step that restores everything. Because obviously, if we don't have the flashlight and we are trying to repair, mend, put back a life together, all we are trying to do is to fit pieces at random with trial and error in the hope that they might just fit. Because we are literally doing it in dim light or in darkness, but not with the connection back to Wahi. And as we connect back to this Wahi, then this revelation, this Wahi, then we have this other dimension that kicks in. Yes, the darkness is gone. The light is back in play. You can see reality reveal itself to you in each one of the steps, and from which you get all of the other benefits. Then Allah makes you a promise. I won't abandon you, and I will not dislike you. What else can one ask for? This is why many times in our dua, in our supplication, when we pray to Allah, we say to him, Allahumma nas'aluka ridhaka wal jannah. We ask of you your satisfaction with us and your neighborhood, the life in paradise to be in your neighborhood. Why? Is because we long for that opportunity to go back, and for that opportunity to go back to our roots. And it is on this note of going back to our roots that I have to give my voice back to whom I consider to be the only voice that can speak of emotions in no better ways that I know of, which is to give it to Rumi to close it for us in his own words. It's interesting of where he put this fragment of his poem. For those of you who are familiar with his corpus of work, what I'm going to read from now happens to be the opening verses that he wrote in book 1 of the Mathnawi. It's almost the equivalent exactly of this experience that the Prophet relived after 40 days from being deprived from revelation. And then revelation comes back to him, and what Allah chooses for him as the first disclosure is to tell him that the dawn is here, I haven't abandoned you, and I have not detested you, and I have a gift for you. And Rumi does the same thing. As I'm sure you remember from his biography, he used to be a teacher. And then when his companion, Shams Tabriz, came in to attend one of his classes, he went all the way to the end, the back of the class, and he sat at the back of the class and was causing in what you might call today in the student body an unruly type of behavior during the class, where he was disturbing the class by uttering all kinds of things at the back of the class. And amongst the things that Rumi was listening to, he realized that that man was his calling. So he closed the instruction books, he dismissed the class, and he said, it's my turn now to go to class. And he starts to follow him, and he goes in. And the work product that comes from this ends up being the Mathnawi. And if you wish, Rumi opens up to set up this plot the same way as this experience that we learned about today, which is to reconnect through our roots via revelation, via reconnecting with the Wahi. So Rumi says, and I quote, listen to the reed, how it tells a tale, complaining of separations, saying, ever since I was parted from the reed bed, my lament has caused men and women to moan. I cannot think of a better way to end today's Khatira, and I will leave it, inshallah, to you to further reflect on these matters. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us guidance. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enlighten us. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins and to reward us. And may you all go in peace, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
So thank you, Dr. Lazzouni.
My pleasure.